Homeless and Housing Ad Hoc Committee. Is that right? Is that right? Yeah, okay. I will, whoever wants to start.
So at the January 23rd meeting, the board created an ad hoc committee, which is myself and Supervisor Bohn, and our task was to look at the idea of a task force to address homelessness and housing, and also the potential, to look at the potential of passing a houseless crisis. So we did have some meetings and we looked at some of the issues, and here for your consideration are two resolutions. We have one that would create a committee to address affordable housing trust fund, and the other is a draft of a potential homeless crisis declaration. So, a shelter crisis, excuse me. So, I hope that you've read both of those. Our idea as far as the committee would be that it would be a standing committee, and it would be created, there would be 9 members and 2 alternates. 5 of those members would be appointed by the individual supervisors and serve at their pleasure. And then there would be 1 member appointed at the recommendation of the Department of Health and Human Services, 1 at the Housing and Homeless Coalition, 1 at the recommendation of the Planning Building Director, and then 1 member appointed by the board, who would have experience in developing affordable housing projects. Then the 2 alternates would be appointed by a majority vote of the Board of Supervisors. And as in this draft recommendation, we talk about the terms of office, etc., and we talk about the duties of that committee. I think it's important to point out that on January 23rd, we also had a motion to create a housing task force, which this committee would do, a housing trust fund. This committee would oversee that, would look at proposed projects, would look at the funding stream revenue, and would make recommendations to the board on how those projects might move forward. We just heard somebody at the public comments suggest that there's a parcel of land available. That would be one of the things that committee would look at. Somebody might have an idea for a tiny housing area with an area that it could fit in. That committee could look at that and how our funding might help it. Another thing I'd really like to point out is that in our approach, what we're saying is, pursuant to Focus Strategies recommendation of housing first, we can really accomplish a lot with this trust fund. And we also have just passed of January 1st, SB 2, which is the real estate transfer tax. $75, $78 on each real estate transfer goes to housing. And also SB 35, which is a relaxed permitting for affordable housing. So both of these became effective at the beginning of the year, and the state gave us those tools. All of those tools can work together, we think, to maximize our ability to respond to issues of homelessness. So that's our recommendation, is the creation of this committee that would then help and recommend to the board how we might address those issues. And then on the issue of declaring a shelter crisis, again, this is up to the board, of course, but we do have concerns about that based on the work that we've done, and some of that has to do with housing, HUD, funding that comes from the federal government, the the county must comply with federal law, Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. As you know, we're in a consent, under a consent decree regarding that. And there's some other issues that we think would make it more powerful for us to concentrate on going under the Housing First model. But there's a lot more in the draft, and just throwing that out for a discussion.
Supervisor Bohn, you have anything to add?
There's a call-in question.
It's an out-of-town buyer.
Do you want to say anything, Supervisor Bohn?
You pretty much covered everything. No, I think the biggest issue on the shelter cry is the American with Disabilities Act. That's huge to us, and following the Housing First strategies. And the other big thing is setting up an affordable housing trust. And I think Supervisor Wilson came up with an idea last week that has merit, that'll have to spend a lot of time and talk to a lot of people. But on these Airbnbs, half of that money going, that may be I know it's not used in any counties our size. It's used in a lot of larger counties. So I don't know what the effect of that would be. And we have to talk to our partners that receive that money now. But it is certainly viable to look at because it does affect the housing. And then the other aspect, if we do the shelter crisis, if a church wants to donate its facility, we have to take staff in there and manage it. And I noticed I got quite a long thing about if a shelter crisis, we can take money from other programs to fund the managing of a shelter crisis. And I don't know how that exactly looks, and I don't know which departments could take it, but I think that's what the ad hoc committee would look at, or the committee would look at and give us an idea. And I think we're looking at a broad base of people involved with it, and still stay within the federal and state guidelines that we're saddled with. So, but you pretty much covered it. Thank you.
And if I just might add one other thing, I mean, you definitely want to hear from the community, and definitely want to hear from our colleagues. It's up to the full board to make this decision, but it is important to point out that the majority of the homeless are within the Eureka city limits, and the city of Eureka has already declared a homeless crisis, if that is helpful for people to consider. But the bottom line is that right now we see an amazing opportunity with the idea of the Housing Trust Fund, other potential streams of funding, as Supervisor Wilson has mentioned, and a community group that can advise us on how people's ideas can come into fruition, and also incentivizing people in the development community to help with this. So I think it's a great opportunity, actually.
Supervisor Bass?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had some comments, but a question or two also. I like the idea of the trust fund committee, considering some of us have been working on one for, well, me for several years, but Paul and Mushrush in the past. So, I'm glad that this is moving forward, where we've got the opportunity to really make it happen. And I think that supporting the Housing First model is important. And I also think finding a way there's local philanthropists who want to give. I ran into someone totally by accident the other day in a coffee shop that said, hey, we're looking for a project and we have substantial money that we may be able to put forward. So I think that's good. I think the ADA issue, I was really surprised when I learned just how restrictive that would be to us, even though maybe state standards are lifted. We have no way around because of our consent decree. So the question I have on that is, I guess for maybe our CAO, even if someone were to donate a piece of property, and if somehow the county was involved in, what aspects of it, does that also then kick whatever the facility that is that we'd be working in, would that also need to be under ADA compliance?
Yes.
Okay. That's a lot. And then my other question is, the one thing I heard from several people in the last couple of days is, while the trust fund committee sounds great, I think there's a different expectation that there could be another type of task force, and I don't know how they do it in other communities necessarily, so I was curious how that conversation, if you guys just thought maybe that's for another time, or maybe this was in its place. So that's my question.
I did get a letter from Nezzy Wade discussing the difference between a task force and the committee. I see very little difference. What I see is something substantial and pragmatic that can move forward. The name really bears little consequence. As far as I'm concerned, we are recommending an empowered committee that is the go-to body for anybody who's got good ideas for addressing the homeless issue. It will be focused. It'll be, they'll be able to discuss how projects could be addressed. Could the county's role just be in a matching fund? Those kinds of things. So there's a lot of potential within this committee working with the Housing Trust Fund to address some of the great ideas that have come forward but have been stymied by lack of location, lack of development funds, et cetera. So I think we're at a very good point here, especially with these state funds coming forward and the state relaxation of some of the requirements to make a big difference. And I think the name of the committee is not such a big deal in my view anyway. I think what the purpose and the focus of the committee is what's important.
Supervisor Bohn?
And if you're going to have a committee that's going to run the trust and then another committee that's going to, it's just not, I think what we need to do, since we're a big part of picking that committee, I think what you do is you pick people with a skill set that can do both and manage both, because we're going to have people at the table that can answer matching funds with the DHHS. We're going to have, the people that are going to be there. And I think as we discuss this, I mean, we're going to seed money for the, I think there's some seed money coming for the Housing Trust, and then we're also going to, I mean, if you look at the paperwork on Lucas Street, for one example, we all had areas. Lucas Street does not work for it because the infrastructure and then what we're trying to do with it wouldn't repay the infrastructure, and we're going to saddle ourselves costs. But somebody else might be able to do something with that piece of property. It's a good accessible piece of property, but has no utilities. It's got trees on it. But somebody with a longer term vision of something with. So we're going to use the money from Lucas Street. We've committed the money of the sale of Lucas Street to that housing trust. So there's going to be monies coming in available with the state monies. This is an issue throughout, the whole western United States, but this is a huge issue in California, and it's sitting on the governor's desk saying, how are we going to solve this problem? So there's going to be monies available, but you're exactly right. There are people stepping up to do stuff that normally are getting out of their comfort zone. So as we move forward, I think the idea is to have one committee, two committees, trying to coordinate two committees. You talk about not getting done, you're going to be herding cats. But I think if you have, one group doing it that has the skill set to both have vision and manage money, I think you're going to be, it's going to be much more appropriate.
And I think it's important to point out that this will be a standing committee under the Brown Act, open meetings, regular meetings, notice with a chair and a vice chair appointed by that committee. This will be a very solid committee, and I think that's what everybody is asking for, is a go-to place to bring all these ideas and bring them to fruition.
Supervisor Bass?
And one other question, I don't know, I just thought of it. Some folks had mentioned that there's the deadline of June 1st. My understanding is it could always be extended. Is that the general understanding from the group?
Oh, yes, you're referring to if to
yeah,
potential
if that
shelter
right,
crisis?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those, a crisis, I don't know, I mean, I suppose there could be a philosopher who says there are certain crises that are unending, but one does say we have, if one is to declare an emergency or a crisis or anything else, it usually has a kind of an end date, and then it can be extended if that is judged to be still existing at that time.
Thank you, I just wanted to confirm that.
I have a question on the ADA. Is the reason that there's the concern, because it's the Government Code Section 8698(1)B, it waives provisions of state and local regulatory statutes, but this is a federal statute, so that's why the ADA would not be applicable.
Correct. Federal law trumps state law, and so Government Code 8698 doesn't exempt us from federal law. And I'd also like to point out in the ADA consent decree that emergency shelters are called out specifically
To be ADA.
to be ADA compliant.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Wilson?
Okay, my microphone's on. I didn't even know it. I think I didn't say anything weird. All right. Okay. Let's see here. I share some of the concern that was expressed. I think Supervisor Bass expressed that with regards to the timeline. I have a question. And is anyone familiar with Eureka's declaration and if it has a timeline to it? It would be, and I don't have an answer to that. And because is the expectation that if the shelter crisis isn't dealt with in 4 months, will we have this back on our agenda again in 4 months? And maybe that's a good thing. So maybe we want it to come back in 4 months, but that's, I think, what will happen if we do limit this to 4 months. So that's something I'd like discussed, or at least, if the public has comment with relationship to that. The other thing is, I think the mission of the committee, in the way that it's written here and in the name, it's sort of it lends itself to seem like it's focused on a trust fund. And what I'm hearing Supervisor Fennell say is that she's saying, well, the mission could be broader, the scope could be broader, or that it is broader. But in my reading of it, and sort of the impression that I got from the public, is that there's an is that that's not how it's being interpreted. And so we might want to have a, focus on trying to see what we can do to change that. And if the name of it is really the Homeless and Housing Task Force, although I'd like, I don't know if it's going to be a task force or a committee, and that's a question we're going to have to deal with a little bit. And then Supervisor Bohn brought up Lucas Street. I don't think we've made any decision on that. We did. Okay, never mind.
did.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you
So,
for correcting me.
okay,
I'm glad
so-
we've done that. So so moving forward from there.
Can I respond to the first item you brought up?
Yeah, hold on. Let me finish.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm pretty much just about done.
Sure.
So with regards to the concept of the short-term rentals and the TOT that's collected from those, I'm looking at models for that, both in California and outside the state, in terms of basically what's happening. It's happening here, and certainly in Arcata, in other places where it has a real impact, especially when you have a population of folks who rely on what is, less than long-term, meaning multiple years. We have a big student population, so a lot of our housing stock is being impacted by short-term rentals, especially in places where people like to visit. And so any way that we can divert some of that, mitigate some of that impact is a good thing. It's said that we have a student population of maybe almost 10% of our student population isn't secure in where they live. And so that's impactful on really the health and safety of our student population and everybody else that also relies on rentals. So, all right, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that in the package you'll notice there's a number of duties. They actually go ongoing review of the county's current and projected homeless assistance and affordable housing revenues and expenditures, ongoing review of federal, state, and local government funding sources for affordable housing, maintaining a spreadsheet listing potential private funding sources for affordable housing, becoming familiar with the county's role as a service provider, on, and making assume responsibilities for making recommendations to the Board of Supervisors for expenditures from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and also working with the public, providing a forum for public expression of desires regarding expenditure of funding. So basically, Yes, it is all tied to the Housing Trust Fund, but it's going with addressing those concerns. So if, for instance, somebody comes and says, I want to provide an area where these tiny houses could go or something of that nature, they would look at that and come back with recommendations to us. And so I mean, I think that it's not, this is a committee that will have a broad ability to take input and make recommendations to the board.
Change the name, and I think you're there.
Yeah.
The name steers it that way. If you change the name, I don't think it's a problem. I think you just move around, put committee right after affordable housing with a trust fund
Yeah.
caveat.
It's fine with me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, before you say my name. But anyway, one of the things I really like about moving this forward with the trust fund concept, or at least being attached, is, as we heard from Sally Hewitt earlier, there are so many, we have monies to help people get housed, but we have no units. So some of this money could be really turned around quickly to be, to rehab those units, to get them up to the standards. So I think that's one of the most promising pieces of what we're doing today, because I think that can happen pretty quickly.
All right. Is there anybody from the public that would like to comment on this item?
Ken Swatsky. I've disclosed before my grandson's level 10 autistic, and so is his grandfather. This is really sad for me. I've had projects since 2007 to satisfy your needs. They're both in Ryan Sundberg's district. People, they say, well, how come you can do all these things? Well, I have what's called a multiple personality order. Tomorrow, I could go out to 2 sites with the surveyor by the end of the week, schedule him to do the rest of the surveying, to do 3,000 to 5,000 square foot lots for 100 units. I can't get you guys to get off your asses and quit paying attention to cannabis long enough to go ahead and give me the carrots I need to do this. So it's very disingenuous for you folks to be talking about all this when those of us, these 2 parcels are free and clear. They're worth millions of dollars. I have the credit line to get started, $25,000 worth of sewer and water hookups just for the permits for the project I have in the area. So I would like some help with that. I'd like to have a more reasonable rate with that. Give me a few carrots, we'll do it. This would be the first of 2 projects. Me, myself, and I and the rest of my staff, we could put 5 more of these together instantly as they're done, and I could have my friends Kern Construction this time of year, if we expedited these projects, probably within whatever time frame your staff can do it, I can get engineering done and have these projects on board. And no reason why within 6 months the roads wouldn't be in, the ADA improvements wouldn't be to these sites, but you won't let us help. Very irritating. And that's why I got to replace a few of you. There's just no doubt about it that if I have to put up with this level of non-cooperation when we should have a common cause, and I can work with Rex. Rex understands exactly the projects I'm talking about here, and others of you, such as Supervisor Sundberg, doesn't seem to have any interest in these kind of projects. You talk a lot, but when it comes down to rubber meat in the road, getting the help we need, and there's other of us out there in the same position I am. I mean, my $200,000 credit limit, which could be a couple million if I wanted it to be, is sitting vacant right now, ready to go, ready to break ground, ready to do this. So can you get out of our way or something? Give us those carrots we need or whatever it is, but we'll fix this problem for you. We're the competent people out in the community who have the skills, the education, the financial backing, and the assets to do these things. All we need is you guys to help us a little bit. Thank you.
Lynette Mullen, good morning, everyone. I appreciate your desire to address the lack of affordable housing. I just have a couple of requests, things that you consider as you move this forward. The first is affordable housing in the Housing Trust Fund is a great idea, and my understanding is those funds would be used to better leverage federal funds in creating affordable housing. One of the challenges with that is that with federal funds, as the county knows, comes restrictions. And there are a lot of folks on the street with a history of evictions or drug convictions that will never qualify for federal housing. And so if this committee, if the scope of this committee is limited, that may be something that this committee would not be addressing. And I think it's important that the committee look at the entire scope of needs, housing needs, for those that don't qualify for certain types of housing, to make sure you're talking about everybody. The other thing is, if you are just looking at housing, there are a lot of folks, in order to be successful in housing, need services. And social services knows this, and they do a great job with the people that they are able to serve. But again, there's a large population out there that does not qualify. And so to look at housing those people without wraparound services case management means that a lot of those folks ultimately won't be successful. So if you're looking at successful housing as the end goal, it's going to take more than just housing. Housing is absolutely the start, but it will take more than that. And so I just suggest, when you're looking at this committee, that you do broaden the scope, because you can't talk about one thing without talking about all of it if you really want to be successful. So thank you very much.
Welcome.
Good morning. My name's Edie Jessup, and the Board of Supervisors Ad Hoc Committee on January 9th was tasked with 30 days to recommend whether or not to declare a shelter crisis in Humboldt County, and recommend whether or not to create a task force or commission on homelessness in Humboldt County, with the intent of ending the lack of affordable housing here in the county. Item H on the agenda today appears to propose a shelter crisis only until June of this year, or apparently just a temporary declaration that does not meet the request nor appear to respond to the county DHHS saying that there is not housing for the current homeless population. The draft resolution for a Citizens Advisory Committee on Affordable Housing Trust Fund and expenditures is non-responsive to the citizen petition for declaration of a shelter crisis and establishment of a citizens task force to create immediate stable housing alternatives for the currently homeless in Humboldt County. This was not part of the ad hoc committee's charge by the board, and it is a long-term solution, perhaps very needed, but does not address the current immediate situation. The housing gap in Humboldt County, by HUD reporting from the county, is we have a lack of 693 beds to serve the current homeless population. And that doesn't include for Humboldt State or the 1,300 students that the Department of Education says exist in Humboldt County. The subpopulations that are included in the HUD reports on homelessness in Humboldt County include chronically homeless adults and families, severely mentally ill, chronic substance abuse, veterans, HIV/AIDS, domestic violence victims, youth, and physically disabled people. DHHS states that there is no affordable housing available now. Housing First policy is not working because there is not available housing. The impact and cost of health issues and criminalization of homelessness and homeless persons is not working to create a stable situation for those 693 or more houseless people, and it's costly. The County Board of Supes ad hoc committee recommendations do not appear to be responsive to citizens' petitions,
Edie.
by DHHS,
Edie.
and citizens weren't included in that. Please declare a shelter crisis that's real and commit to creating an immediate shelter for those
Thank you.
700 people for whom there are no shelter beds.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Am I back on here? Good morning, members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is John Schaefer. I live in Arcata. Thank you for all you do and putting up with all the abuse that we heap on you. Let me heap a little bit more, having said that. If I'm not mistaken, at the last meeting, which when we addressed the existing housing crisis, there is an existing housing crisis, everybody recognizes it. At the last meeting, I believe all of your constituents asked you to declare a housing crisis. Now, all of this business about committees and trust funds, these are good things to do, and I urge you to take those steps. But I urge you also to declare a housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you.
I videotaped every single board meeting on homelessness in this room from 1993 until 1996. And the only reason I stopped was, and I would put it on community access, the only reason I stopped was because we got live TV coverage. I was going to say that that last meeting you had was the most impressive one that I've ever been at. I thought it was just extraordinary. The level of honesty and truthfulness and hope and compassion that was expressed by your staff and the staff of HHC, I never get the initials right, but you know what I mean, was the foundation for a transformational approach to homelessness on the North Coast. I have the transcript right here. Rex, I want to make this clear. I thank everybody who's ever stood up, spoken up, done anything to help people who are homeless. So we had a misunderstanding, but we don't have time to fix it in this 3 minutes. But you asked the best questions. You said, and I quote, I think we have to answer to everything we're doing and why it isn't getting better. And I think the frustrating part is throwing money at it, and staff and people hasn't solved the problem. With all the money we're spending, isn't there anywhere in the United States where they're having success stories and that we can learn from them? That wasn't your exact bullets. And I think collaboratively, we can do AHA. We can find something to put 30, that's 36%. It's going to be steps. And then you talk about overcoming the environmental barriers. You were one person. There were questions and wisdom and hope and compassion and love expressed in this room that was just extraordinary. But by the process of creating this housing trust, whatever you're calling it, you are shortchanging exactly the process that is required to do the best at Humboldt County, because that's what Mike Wilson spoke to. We need to do our best. This is 30 years. I was here 30 years ago. And you set in motion something that could bring together the best innovative ideas that happen, not only in our county, because you said it is a national issue, it's a world issue. So we're all struggling with this. It's very complicated. It's not solved simply by throwing money at it. And I understand you're all busy, so you probably didn't get to listen, because I didn't hear everything until I read it through. But the thing is, it's not just about money. It's about people who can't fit into the programs, who can't adapt to housing as it is. They deal with the chronically homeless. They were very clear about that, you know, with Sally's programs. So you didn't have everybody at the table. You didn't have the veterans. You didn't have the people with AIDS. You didn't have all the other groups that are very involved. If we could get that together and move forward and have the kind of discussion that we had the last time, I think Humboldt County would be a pioneer. But if you go back to doing what we've always done, which is throwing money at it and saying it's only about housing, we're stuck.
And then please don't clap. We try and make this an open meeting for everyone to feel welcome, and if there's someone with an opposing view, it could discourage them from participating. So I appreciate that courtesy. Thank you.
I need the encouragement, please. No. I want to thank AHA for collecting the signatures and getting it before you. Thank you. And I want to sort of look at this as addressing both short-term needs and long-term needs. And both are welcome and necessary. The trust fund, money is needed. Housing is expensive. Housing is needed. So thank you for the trust fund committee, and go for it, go get it. The shelter crisis declaration, and there was a question about what Eureka did. Eureka passed it in January of 2016. So it's been a couple years, and they've had it, and it's still in effect. There was no deadline. It took them until April before they actually used it. So January, February, March, April. So 3 months. It was 3 months in effect before they used it. Opened up what became the Betty Chin's Blue Angel Village, and then also opened up sleeping sites. So they used it. They still have it. Hopefully they'll use it again. That you are considering also using this tool as a state tool that reduces your liability and sets aside some codes, but not all. I hope that you pass it and that you use it. As for what's before you, you set a deadline. When I first looked at it, I said, Rex is planning to raise a lot of money really quickly. But yeah, I think it's a very ambitious deadline for you, and I would suggest that perhaps instead you make it a time when it comes back to you for an update instead, and not put a deadline, because you'll still have a shelter crisis. You will still have a shelter crisis in 3 months, 4 months. I also, the ADA issue, this tool does not address it, but that's okay, because it should be addressed. And whatever you do, there needs to be ADA access. Right now, the folks in wheelchairs are having issues with being able to find shelter, so address it. Don't use it as an excuse not to do anything. And also, I'd like to acknowledge the work that the Humboldt Housing and Homeless Coalition has been doing on trying to find shelters for people. This is the immediate need. This is what people need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I have a couple things for you.
Sure. Welcome.
Hi, Lisa Pelletier again. In addition to being on the Legal Redress Committee of the NAACP, I'm also on a housing access work group in Arcata, which is part of Equity Arcata. And I've done a lot of research on this issue, and I would say I have talked to Wes Weir of the Housing Authority. I've talked to Nezzy Wade. I have interviewed a lot of people on this issue, and I'm still learning. But what I'm learning is it's not just a housing crisis, and yes, we have a housing crisis in this state, but it's an affordable housing crisis. We have a lack of affordable housing. In Arcata, it's something like, it's a little over 5%. And it's just, and even the state treasurer has said, it's not a crisis, it's a catastrophe. So you have to address this catastrophe. You can't just put a little committee together and get a little fund to create more housing. You have to actually address the affordable housing crisis, and rents are way too high. People cannot afford rents, and wages are too low. This is something else I'm learning. You have to recognize this, and please declare an emergency shelter crisis. We need it, and it's shameful that it's taken 30 years for anyone to even consider declaring it. People are dying on the streets, so I urge you and would deeply appreciate if you would do your duty and call an emergency shelter crisis. Thank you.
Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Deborah Carey. I think it's morning anyway. I just wanted to thank you for coming this far. I really appreciate all the work that you've done. I just ask that we are here. Let's not get held up here, because you guys have done a lot of work, and we could go forward. We know that this issue is longer than 4 months. We've been in it a long time. You know that the city of Eureka, Rex, is that Betty Chin is working with no ADA compliant. We can do this. Let's not get hung up. Let's not get hung up. Let's seriously work hard with each other. I want to work with you, but I'm saying work hard with each other, and I appreciate everything that you've done. Let's not get hung up on time limits, on it being winter shelter. Let's look at it as our community, public health and safety for all, and for all the people that are out there that don't fit into that. You heard Lynette say that there's many people that don't fit, and those people will still be out if we just do what we're going to do. So we need to address them all, and I know that it's a tough job, but I know you guys are the group to do that. And I really, when you put a task force together, I don't care what you call it, as long as the voices are there. It's just not the people that are working for the county and the state. I want all the voices in every area to be there. The people that are struggling in all your areas to have their voice there, at least one of their voices there, so we can hear what they're dealing with. And when we criminalize, we know that criminalization makes criminals. And now we have a lot of criminals that we're not going to be able to get into the housing that you're addressing. It's a problem because it ruins their credit. So I just plead with you, and I thank you all for all the work you do to continue on. Don't let anything hold you up, and let's really address this and declare a shelter crisis declaration, and just work hard. Let's not, I remember years back, Betty was out. She was an enabler. Let's work that hard, Rex. Let's work that hard for the rest of the people, and I know this board can do it, and I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Winchell Dillon Beck. I'm saddened, I'm disappointed, and I think this is short-sighted. I tried to actually prepare some comments, but I've been listening this morning. A shelter crisis for 4 months is a joke. It shows no political will. From everything that's been said, and I don't need to repeat what people have said, there is no housing. You're not going to solve this in 4 months. That's really clear. Two, you talk about creating a trust fund, and that's a great idea, but I think people are right. You know, we know how you're going to stack the committee, and we know how you're going to move this forward, and it's not going to be comprehensive. The problem with that committee's charge, and you know, I'm trying to do my homework on this, but I've read the plan. And you guys are still holding on to housing first. And there's nothing in housing first that will solve this problem until you open up a strategy committee. There's no money for the villages. There's no money for sanctuary camps, and we cannot get there fast enough. You know, I don't mean to be overly passionate, you know. Maybe it doesn't mean anything to you, but you know, I'm the father of a homeless child who has struggled with every last issue in this county. And it's breaking my heart that people aren't doing anything. I'm going to leave you with this quote from Dylan. How many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? And how many ears must one man have before he can hear people cry? And how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? I just urge you to open up and really look at this and get the political will, because you are crushing people, criminalizing them. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
I'm Holly Klingel. I frequently attend. I don't often speak, and I'm really torn. I know that you all are people of goodwill, and I know that we have a difficult problem to solve. And I know that we had trouble when we were doing the point-in-time count. An elderly friend and I I spent 2 days at the Serenity Inn and then decided with my friend to go to the McDonald's on 4th Street and try to count then. People were afraid to talk to us. I'm a battered old woman. She is in worse physical health than I am, and people were afraid to talk to us. Now, we've got fear out there. We've got missing people out there. I cannot drive from my apartment on Wabash downtown without seeing things that make me want to cry. We are all in this together. If we're going to base our economy on cannabis, recreational or medical, and ecotourism, and art festivals, and music festivals, then we've got to clean up our city, and the way to do that is to find places for people to be safe, warm, and dry. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
An observation, I'm listening to all these people out here in the audience talk about the homeless issue. I'm glad to see the enthusiasm that we're getting from the public. What I'm asking here is I'm seeing the same old stoic faces up here. The comment that you're doing by saying nothing, and the stoic is a good word for that. I'm seeing the same old dog and pony show, again, year after year after year. Now, to some of the people in the audience, I want to tell you to serve on a committee. Don't let this thing go away. Get out there, maybe run for office against these people. You might lose, but so what? You get to use the press for several months and Channel 3 News. They will put you on there and your comments will be heard. Instead of having this 3-minute buzzer go off on you, you get more than 3 minutes when you're sitting up here. They get all day to comment. So get off your high horses and don't quit commenting on this dog and pony show they're doing. Serve on the committees, keep it going. This has been year after year, and it's not going to get solved overnight. But I don't know how to solve this. Other cities are having the same problem. There's got to be an answer. It's got to get better at least. But this, just like I say, dog and pony show is a good word to use.
Well, thank you for that. Is there any other comments from the public? Welcome.
I am Bonnie McGregor. I just don't want to leave it there as the last sentiment coming from us, even though I understand where he's coming from in frustration. One person at a time ends homelessness unless we're going to, change of the very big structures in society that exist, because this has been, every time we solve a problem, it's something else comes and makes it worse. So I want to acknowledge that you're working on slippery slopes. I also want to thank you very much for the ideas that you have come forward for the long term, and I think they're workable if we can get some money to rehab right away and get people into better housing. It's hard to actualize and materialize ideas, and I think my sense is that that's what you're trying to do to make it real. So I really appreciate that. And I also firmly agree that a 4-minute, that's what it feels like, a 4-month declaration of a crisis that is ongoing it will bring us all back here, and frustration will be on you again and on us, and there's no need. Let's set a date to review it, I would suggest, and make it a year, because honestly, it's going to take a long time. And I also really wish, because in the 1992 housing element for the county, we talked about housing parks that were like in some of the, like people could have their vehicles there and stay there legally. we've been trying to find that interim thing between the long term and the immediate crisis over and over and over and over again. So if you can maybe have the first thing you do on that committee and working with the coalition to have, you know, really the most pressing thing is the people right now, every day. And I appreciate the heartbreak, because if you know one or two people, you know what it feels like. Every time it rains, I go, oh, the rain, oh, the rain. Because we need the rain, and I know what is happening to people's lives when it starts raining. So, yes, thank you, and let's all carry on and keep doing this.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking on this serious issue. You know, there's obviously some excellent ideas and solutions that are being presented, and the challenge really is to put the team together to really make some tracks. I think one of the aspects of that team really needs to be relieving the roadblock, and I think the roadblock really is spelled N-I-M-B-Y. A lot of people are very concerned about where a camp would be or where this housing would take place. As much as it needs to happen, that I think really needs to be a part of the campaign, and that will help dissolve that roadblock. When we see some of these camps just filled with trash, and and we see the drug use and the theft and all that kind of stuff, we need to address that in our campaign and solving this problem. So I hope that's not ignored, and I think that will really help us out a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, we will close public comment and bring it back to the board. Does anybody want to start? Supervisor Wilson?
Sure. So for me, I do have some criticisms of this, and I've sort of expressed them, but and it's in terms of moving forward, I don't know what we're going to come out with, but I'll vote yes or no on whatever we get to, and I may have to vote no because I don't think it goes far enough, not because I'm against moving forward. But so on that, I have a question with regards to, or not a question, I do think removing the timeline for the declaration is something that I think is important, just throwing that on the table. I do think there is confusion too about going back to the duties of the committee, because I just reviewed, there's 10 duties in that list of duties for the committee, 2 of which are not super germane. It's just becoming familiar with the county's role as a service provider is one, and prepare formal draft bylaws to be adopted by the committee. But the other 8 of these duties, affordable housing and affordable housing trust fund is the core of each one of those 8. Only on all of them. Homelessness assistance only is mentioned in the first of those duties. So I just want to be, so when we're talking anything, so I can see why people might see that this committee and its duties are really focused on one thing, which is affordable housing and affordable housing trust fund, versus the issue, the immediate issue of homelessness and homelessness services that is sort of the core of the angst of what we're hearing here today. So we could expand some of these duties, like where everywhere it says affordable housing, say, and homeless assistance or something like that, in which case there would be 3 places where we could add that to expand the role of this committee. So it's not just totally just affordable housing, because like I said, 8 of those 8, affordable housing. 6 of those 8 talk about funding sources and revenues. There is nowhere where it talks really about efforts, programs, energy, the things that people are talking about in terms of like and I'm sorry I'm using sort of those abstract words, but they're real. I'm just saying every one of these is just talking about, or 6 of these 8 just talks about funding and doesn't talk about any kind of other kind of effort. And so I could see where folks who want to talk about how we might change policies or anything else, that's not addressed here. So I can see why folks feel this way, and I would like to see an expansion of the, if we're going to go with this committee, I'd like to see some expansion in terms of its mission and its duties to address homelessness and go beyond just funding. So I guess that's what I want to just put out there for that. And then on the participants list, also, I think expanding that is something that people are asking for, and I could, at minimally, I think having a seat from the Homeless Coalition would be a reasonable expectation. Minimally, I think there's been some folks who've talked about, you know, adding the sheriff's office or adding other, you know, just even beyond that, other service providers. But for me, I think that's kind of a minimal expansion. And then just to acknowledge again, I think was brought up, the slippery slope of homelessness. We're in a society that creates homelessness. We're arguing amongst ourselves, amongst the scraps of resources that we have to work with, because those are siphoned off way before we ever get to this point. And with that, those are just my concerns, criticisms, and I do want us to move forward with something today.
All right. Well, this does have a draft right across it, so it can definitely change, and that's what we're here to talk about. Supervisor
Yeah,
Bohn?
that's, I was going to reiterate that, thanks. And the problem being is because I've been involved with people that are involved in this, and I think what pushed this, everything goes towards funding, is nobody wants to give houses to house people that we have to find the funding to do that. I don't care if you're building tiny villages. I don't care if you're doing this. We have to find funding, and we have to deliver that funding in the most appropriate way. With that being said, I can tell you right now, when I worked with Betty and everything she was doing before I got elected, I got a whole hell of a lot more done. Nothing like getting yourself an anchor around your butt is getting elected to office and trying to get anything done, because now you have to follow all these governmental guidelines. But before, we were able to do a lot more when there wasn't governmental money. I haven't talked to the lady, obviously, that came up and says, I have space. That's all you have to hear. There are so many apartments being rented out there that you guys never hear about because they go to Betty Direct. She uses them. She gets kids. I mean, because it's not involved. There's no government money involved. There's other people doing that, and I appreciate. Now, the committee isn't a committee we're going to select. And I can tell you who my possible selection was going to be to that, and it probably wasn't going to be, you know, the one everybody would suspect, but they have a pretty good idea on homelessness and everything else, and I actually told her she was probably going to be my appointment to it. So I think we have to set up a criteria, and as we move forward, we had 30 days to put something together, to put these drafts together, and all it is a draft so we could get this input. And you're right, we spend $2.8 million on this a year. And I don't mean to demean our staff or anything else, because they care. Nobody comes out of Humboldt State or whatever university with a degree in sociology or whatever they're going to do and says, I want to go wallow in homelessness. They come out with a vision to fix it and work with it. And I think they want it. And the only way we're going to do it is working with the private sector. And heaven forbid, we're probably going to have to work with them damn big nasty developers too, because nobody walked in here with a tool belt this morning. Those are the guys that do it, the Dankos and the Strombecks and those guys. So we're going to have to work with those people and find a common ground. I heard what Lynette said. I mean, Lynette had some great ideas, but state funding, some of the state funding that we're looking for does not put restrictions. I mean, does not put restrictions. They don't do credit checks. Staff is well aware of that. I really appreciate the city of Eureka putting somebody on staff on the homelessness issue this last year, because a majority of the homelessness is in Eureka. So that has to be done, and that's another part that we have to look at. I don't think we want to kick the can down the road because we live here. None of us are driving out of this county to go live somewhere else. We see it every day, every damn day, and it's not a good feeling. Am I proud of what I see on the streets? No. But I can tell you what, with my 1 or 2 trips to Sacramento, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every time down there and I go for a walk. And that's our state seat where all the geniuses live. And they make this place look like a paradise. You have blocks and blocks of tents, homelessness. I go visit because I have a young gal who's, I know, good friends with her parents, that manages the day park for Fishes and Loaves. Absolutely astonishing what the job they do and how many people are involved down there. And that's the centerpiece of where we should be solving these problems. We're looking to these people for help, and they're lining the Capitol. They probably have 30 or 40 people camped on the Capitol grounds every night. And at 6:30, the Capitol Police come start rustling them out away so they're not there when people come to work. It's a tough, tough deal down there. That's not pawning it off saying everybody's got the problem. But the only way we're going to do this is not like this. It's going to have to be like this. And I'll tell you what, there's some people out there that just don't like the idea of working with me, and I probably don't like the idea of working with them. But to solve this problem, I would love to work with you. And I think we can. I really do. And there's nobody up here that wants to kick the can, because we're not kicking the can. We're kicking people down the road. And you don't think I get up in the morning and get in my pickup and turn the heater on when it's 34 degrees? You don't think I think about people don't have a heater to turn on? So, and I don't think there's a person up here that doesn't. My problem is I don't know if a declaration, all this stuff we do, I don't know if anything solves it until we just get down, get dirty, and do it. And we're saddled with the ADA. That's not a little thing. That adds 30% to anything we're doing. What I'd like to do is, you guys, let's go. I mean, Yuba City now, I went and saw them. They're doing tough sheds. Pretty simple. Take a look, and I don't want to put that off. The containers that we built, you know, everybody talks about the funding. The containers almost were $140,000 to get them set on the ground, get them remodeled, so they would allow people in them, provide power and everything else. You take a look where they are now, down there by the DHHS offices. They've got a meeting place. They have gardens. They have very, very few. I called the chief of police how many calls he had done. I think they've had 2 in 6 months, and it wasn't the residents. It was people bothering the residents. So let's work together and get this. I don't think declaring, I don't know if that helps or hurts, and I'm not saying which way I go, but I think we better declare to each other we're going to work together and get this done and find some property without government restrictions. I mean, I don't know how that looks. I can't use the big fancy words like Mike and everything else, but I know anything you try to do when government monies are involved that we don't associate out some way come with a lot of restrictions, and it ends up becoming the Lawyers and Engineers Full Employment Act instead of solving the homeless problem. So that's my soapbox for the day.
Can't clap for you either.
I just want to, as also having served on the ad hoc committee, voice my real desire that people work together. I think that that's the only way we're going to solve these problems. And if a name does it for you, we can change the name and say the Housing Trust Fund and Homeless Solutions Committee. If that says you're working on homeless solutions, I think that's fine. I really want to say that, you know, the Housing First strategy, embracing that is really a core issue, because what we understand is that somebody here is a father who just said his son is homeless. Okay? Now, why is his son homeless if his father has a house? maybe because he's got some issues to deal with. And that's the whole Housing First strategy. It's like, let's get you in somewhere, and then we will provide you the services to deal with the problems that made you homeless in the first place. So I think that is why we embrace that with the housing, the focus strategies study. I think it's really important, and I really appreciate Deborah's work and her saying, work with us. That's the whole idea. This is empowering people who are passionate about this issue, and I really appreciate your passion, to do something about it, to be involved in this committee, involved in the work of this committee, and come up with solutions. It's not a dog and pony show, and I really actually find that offensive. I think that when you talk about the idea of finding solutions, you talk about rehabbing rundown buildings, tiny homes, whatever comes up, address it, give us some potential solutions, and there are ways that we can work with that housing trust fund. Also, we don't want to be a barrier. We want to work with the community. This is a way that we have suggested that we can. And it may not satisfy everyone, and that's one thing I've learned very, very clearly as an elected official. You can't please everyone all the time, but you got to do what you think is best for your community, and that's what we're trying.
Supervisor Bass?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, but I did want to comment when Supervisor Wilson said he had criticisms. I don't think anyone received those as criticisms. I think we're all just doing some suggestions of how this might be tweaked a little better.
Constructive criticism.
Okay. I just think they're great ideas. So, but you know, one of the ones that I will bring up is I do think that I prefer that the June 1st timeline not be there, or deadline not be there. I don't know, you know, whether it's a year. I do think checking in is important if we move forward with the resolution. And I have well, before I go to my hypothetical, I wanted to say to Mr. Sawatsky's point, and anyone else who has something that they think is a viable project, I don't know if anyone's called me to have a sit down with planning and building, but you know, we're more than happy to facilitate that. So let me just get that out there. If anyone hears that, you got an idea, we can't always make it happen, but we can make the meetings happen. And I know meetings are a place where good ideas go to die sometimes, but it's also the way you hey, Jamila, how are you? It's the way you have to get things in the process. So I have a hypothetical I think it's for our CAO. So if this resolution were to pass, or if it doesn't, you can figure out how this would go. If someone had a piece of property like the speaker mentioned earlier, and there was no government funding involved, I'm not sure how you get away from government funding any services involved, tough sheds were there. I mean, what would passing this resolution do to facilitate that versus what we can already do if somebody brought those pieces together? I mean, is there an on-the-ground difference?
So you said there was no government funding involved.
I'm giving you the...
So there's nothing that prohibits any outside organization, a nonprofit, from entering into these kinds of services or providing a shelter.
And so tough sheds...
It is zoning.
Right. Like I'm just trying to figure out what we can actually do now, even if we don't have a resolution, or what the resolution allows for. What I can tell you, some people have been concerned of, you know, just is the thought of, well, does that mean people can, if a resolution, does that mean people can just put tents in their backyard? And what I'm saying is these would be specific to specific locations.
So Government Code 8698 is specific to public facilities. That's an important piece to understand here. So public facilities have the lessened restriction. But again, we still have to comply with federal law.
Especially now.
Especially ADA.
And then the other thing, and I don't think anyone's here, in the past we've talked about state, you know, issues with the state really in regards to allowing people to even live in trailers. I mean, there are things that we are trying to do as local government, but when you look at the bigger picture of what's happening in the state, people can't live in trailers. I mean, there are so many restrictions, and we have a lot of good ways that we could solve some of our challenges, but we can't change those rules, right? I should have Paula Mushrush here. I didn't warn you I was going to ask this.
So we do have to comply with state law, yes. So it's a legislative thing. And the state has recently provided local governments with a new set of tools, and that would be Senate Bill 2 with the $75 recording fee, and Senate Bill 35, which relaxes affordable housing zoning permitting. So there are some tools out there that are available to local governments, but they're very new. They just came into effect January 1.
And I just always thought it was kind of a waste that there are people who have trailers that are in good condition that people would actually be happy to live in, but we don't have a way to make that happen. And so this doesn't change that. I think it's a bigger legislative fix. That's not a county fix.
I would say other organizations have the ability to possibly make the trailers viable. Government is a little bit more limited because of the restrictions and the laws that we have to comply with.
Supervisor Fennell?
And one concept of putting an appointee recommended by the planning department is, if you're looking at issues of what could be acceptable, et cetera, in that committee, there will be tremendous help in that discussion without there being a discussion that then had to come before us and be discussed. So this is the kind of committee envisioned as the kind of committee that will bring all of these ideas and potential solutions together. And that's what the makeup is about. So, I think one other thing that I starred here was, I can't remember who said it, but said a safe, warm, and dry. Oh, I think, yeah, it might have been Bonnie. But I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at trying to, thank you. I remember Bonnie working on that a very, very long time ago. And there were some public areas that were taken out from under her because of whatever reasons. So once in a while, public areas become available. I think more often private areas do. But if you have help for people who might want to rehab rundown places, make them acceptable to live in, help for people who want to do a tiny home village, any of those things, this is what this committee would do. And it could do it as fast as it wanted to. And I really appreciate Supervisor Wilson's comment that we can add to that, not just the Lucas Street, et cetera, but the transient occupancy tax and those things. But that can be moved, that can be looked at by that committee or folded in. But I see this as something that is a foundation for solving a problem. And I know Lisa Dugan sent me an article from, I don't know, Los Angeles maybe. They have been throwing money, throwing declarations, and throwing everything else at this issue, and they still haven't solved it. We're still at a point where we could, if we get together and work together, and that's what I'd like to see.
Thank you. So for my part, I don't know if there's any subject more difficult than this one. Yes. It's everywhere, and it's here, and I've had, my youngest sister has been homeless off and on, and it's, she's got resources, family backup, and we still can't keep her from being homeless. And so it's a very, very tough situation, and you sometimes have to try and thread the needle between, are you helping them, or are you enabling them, and especially when there's a lot of drugs involved and that kind of thing, so, or alcohol. It's a really, really tough subject, but it's heartbreaking for sure. I just had a call last week from somebody who I was helping with a code enforcement issue on a property, and there was a car left there. It was full of garbage. So I don't know if you've ever seen these tweaker houses, but they just stuff cars full of garbage. And the lady came back in the morning, and there was a woman and a 5-year-old kid sleeping in the car on top of the garbage. And the child had no shoes on. And I said, here's all the information for Health and Human Services, the Family Resource Center. Here's the phone numbers. If you see them again, please give them these numbers. There's help out there for them. And but this is McKinleyville. It's heartbreaking for sure. And I hope people realize it. I mean, from all the comments up here today, we care about this issue. We hear what you're saying, and there's no one size fits all answer. It's a complicated issue, and we have a couple of different drafts here that we can look at. So for my part, I don't care what it's called. I don't care if you declare one thing or do a committee. Whatever gets us to the place where we can actually start making progress on this, and progress the quickest, and get the best minds in Humboldt County thinking about this and giving us solid input. That's what I want. And if the duties need to change on the committee list or the people on it, I'm all about it. So, Supervisor Bohn.
And I can tell you, he didn't finish the whole story, because I do this all the time, and I think it drives him nuts. But I will stop and talk to somebody on the streets. I've done it numerous times. I've actually stayed with a person till somebody from the DHHS crisis team shows up, and they show up. And we sometimes saying, we keep hearing these numbers, $2 and $3 million, and million here and million there, and pretty soon you have $2 million. But we spend a lot of money, and a lot of that resource is spent, and there's a lot of good results. But I mean, I did one 2 weeks ago, Friday, 5 to 5 on a Friday. I had somebody out here passed out in front, bleeding, and I called the sheriff, called the police, and they were saying, well, call the ambulance, call this. I called the DHHS hotline. They came down here and sent somebody down here, because they don't just work 9 to 5. They do a great job, but what we have to do is utilize their knowledge, the power of their matching funds, funding, trying to do deliverables with the ideas that are out there. I have no doubt AHA can do what they're saying they're going to do. It's just finding the place, getting them some money, and proving that they can do it. There's other people out there that want this to happen because they're tired of it. And I don't care who gets credit for it, but it was a great statement. It's one at a time. I mean, we talk about a village that it's only 30. It's only 30. Well, 30, 30 is, you're right, it's 5%, of what the numbers say, the HUD numbers, and those are so far off, I even hate to quote them. So it's moving along instead of talking about it. I don't care what the hell we name it. I don't care how we do it. I don't care if we declare a crisis or not and everything else. I just want to do something. I mean, we had 30 days to throw this together, and I can remember the meeting so well that Mike and Virginia brought it forward, and they wanted to make sure they both brought it forward, and then when we went to start the ad hoc committee, their chairs became empty. So I'm sitting there, I want to go to the movie, but I don't want to pay for the popcorn. So I appreciate working with Estelle, because Southern Humboldt has a problem. I'm, centrally located in my areas have a problem. And I really appreciate the effort and the compassion that our CAO brought to the meetings. I mean, she started out at DHHS. She understands what the hell's going on here. So I think as we move forward and worry about what's declared, what it's named, and everything else, and get the ground running, we've already proven we can do it. There's housing out there for, there's places out there that are doing it that didn't. We got a little bit of help from the government. We got a little bit, but we weren't saddled with the restrictions of the government. They would like to assist. So let's do a better job than we're doing. That's all I'm saying. I mean, let's get some bang for our buck. And you're exactly right. We're short on housing. I mean, I can look at headlines all day. We've got an opioid crisis. We got a homeless problem. We got a marijuana problem. We got problems up our ass. But I mean, the problem is, if we're going to fix them, it's going to take a lot of us doing something together, rather than saying this, that, and everything else. And I'm willing. I mean, I wish I knew your name that offered the piece of property. Tell me your name. No, behind you. You didn't offer any property, Edie. Valerie, thank you. Valerie's willing to step up. There's other people out there willing to step up, and I know there's other people that stepped up. So maybe Valerie and us can do something together. I just got tired of saying that lady. So, I mean, and that's how it starts. I mean, I don't know where Valerie came from. I don't know where she lives. I don't know what she has to offer. But she wants to offer something, and I think that's all it's going to take. So.
Got Supervisor Bass and Supervisor Fennell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, all these have draft on it, so obviously this has to come back to us. So this is for conversation. You know, I'm thinking I can support the resolution with the change of however we want to change the deadline or check-in date. But I do want people to know, if we do move forward on this, I don't want people to get a sense of false hope, because it is not going to answer everything. You're not going to be able to do some of what you think you're going to be able to do. But if this is part of making people feel more energized to bring those resources together, you know, I think I can be good with that. I'll call it on Bonnie again, too. I think she was around, you were around when my dad was on the Board of Supervisors. I don't know if they've talked about this back then in the 70s, but I'm glad you're still here, because you have a lot of history and you bring a lot of wisdom to the table. So, and then in regards to the committee, whatever it's called, I think the structure of it is pretty good. I think there's been some good suggestions, and I'd like to see us move forward with bringing something back based on what our conversations have been today. Now, what that looks like in the form of a motion, I don't know. And I don't know if we're even at that point yet.
Supervisor Fennell.
Well, you know, we did come back in a short amount of time, because the whole idea is, let's get it done. And so, okay, we were arguing about words, and now we're going to put it off another while. I mean, this is the kind of thing that drives me crazy. So I recommended the name of the committee, the Housing Trust Fund and Homeless Solutions Committee. Maybe that will work. Supervisor Wilson mentioned putting some of the duties in there to include words "and homeless assistance," or...
I can be more specific when
Yeah.
I get a chance here.
So do we want to then say come back in 2 weeks with a revised resolution? Or do we say what we got is good enough and we'll work with it?
She said we can't put it in draft form anyway.
It's in draft form.
Yeah,
so
it's
we
in
have
dra-
to come back.
exactly.
Okay,
Oh, it has
so
to come
since
back?
it's in draft form, let's...
Okay.
So perhaps we can go through and give some really clear direction,
Yes.
and then, since it's coming back anyways, and then we can pick a time for it to come back. Supervisor Wilson?
Sure. So the specific things that I've heard, and the first thing I want to say is I did mention to the CAO yesterday, I was really very appreciative of the work that had gone into this in 30 days, that it turned around quickly, and there was a draft. And Supervisor Bohn is correct. Like, you know, he and Supervisor Fennell took it on, and she get a lot of credit for that, because this is the most difficult issue we deal with pretty much on a day-to-day basis. So, and so I think the work that was done here, although, you know, we have discussions about some of it, I want to make sure that everyone understands. We very appreciative of what's been put forward here. So the first thing I see on the list is the time frame of the declaration. That was one thing that had been brought up, and I would like to have that be open-ended with a year check-in, which I thought was a reasonable thing. On the language within the duties, I think there was duties B, C, and G, all could add something in the language that, and this because it's coming back, could be worded by the ad hoc committee that just adds something related to homelessness solutions and/or policies related to, so basically expanding the mission within B, C, and G seems to be the easiest places to put those things in. So I think that could happen pretty easily. And then with regards,
Will you say that last one again?
B, C, and G.
And what do you want to add into there?
I want to, I think that adding, there, it just seems in the way that those are worded, it's the easiest place to add something that expands beyond just funding sources for affordable housing, expanding into homelessness solutions and/or policies, or something that broadens the scope for the committee to talk about. So I don't have that wording right at the, my fingertips, but those are the easiest places to drop it in. So, yeah.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Sounds good.
And then on the memberships, I believe that there was a from the planning commission. Okay, that they're planning that department. So only from my perspective, I think someone from the housing coalition. Oh, they're in there.
Yeah.
Okay, good enough. Then those are my suggestions.
Supervisor Bone?
Well, I saw Mr. Russell was here, and I see John Ford I don't see here. But I'm pretty sure that if the planning and building shows up, since these are open meetings, I got a feeling that Paula Mushrush with our housing group, I think we're going to have attendance from these people on. I mean, we can request them there. They can put input and everything else. Sometimes people think the committee is the committee, and I think there's a lot more to be said for it. So I'm not restricted. And we can add anything we want. I think the gist of what we're trying to figure out is understood. So we can put as much as, my biggest thing is I don't want any parameters put on it. I want it to be as broad as possible. So as you add more stuff, people are going to say, well, that's all added and it's not there. So we can add everything on there if need be, because I think, again, it's just a title, I think, but the end result, I think everybody is probably on the same page on. So,
can I just want to, I don't mean to.
Yeah.
I think those were words of wisdom from Supervisor Bone with regards to how committees work. Is that anyone can come to these committees.
It's open.
And they're open to the public. So just because you're not a member of the committee does not mean you do not have power of the input. And you can participate, and I have seen pretty much in most of our committees, whether it's any of our committees, that they love it when the public comes and has input, because oftentimes they really are the only people that do show up. So I do encourage folks to participate. I just wanted to back Supervisor Bone up on that.
Yeah, I mean, all those committee meetings should have a full room every time. We talked, again, I go back to Bonnie because we're on the A1AA advisory committee. One of the things we talked about recently is a move for seniors to bring people into their home. So they're empty nest syndrome, where you got a big house, a lot of room, and it kind of can work together with somebody coming in and sharing that home with you, also some companionship. So there are many, many different ways that we can help people with housing. And the other one is second units, is rental of second units. These things are partly addressed in the general plan update, but generally speaking, all of those things can be discussed and addressed in this committee as far as I'm concerned, and basically with the idea of finding solutions. So I appreciate your input on, and any other input that there is. I think we don't want to be a barrier. We want to help.
So just to keep us on track here, so we've got the time frame to 1 year with the check-in, B, C, and G, expand into homelessness, and then I'm hearing from a few of you to add to the duties something like make recommendations to the board of supervisors on homeless issues, just to make it broad enough to where their scope can take on any issue. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that what you said? Yeah. Okay.
I think that was in all the B, C, and G part. The other on I, on I, which is prepare, which I think this committee will have its own chance to weigh in on its own on that list of duties, or be more specific, because it'll have the on I is prepare formal draft bylaws to be adopted by the committee. So it will have its own. It will create its own direction in that regard.
Okay. Supervisor Bass, did you have anything to add?
I think I started out with the you know, kind of where we ended up with the extension of the date and all the, I'm fine with what I'm hearing.
Okay. Supervisor Bohn?
And I'd ask our DHHS or CAO, I'm not sure which one, could you contact other directors and see if other counties have a homeless task force or something along these lines, so we don't have 2 meetings tied to how you're going to write the bylaws? Because I'm a big fan of, I mean, this has already been done. Let's not reinvent this wheel. I mean, the bylaws and everything else, but 9 people talking about bylaws and I's and he's and she's and everything else when they're already written, and then you guys can look at that. So, because I know there's other task force, and I'm sure they've already done this legwork, and I don't, again, 2 meetings is 2 meetings, but it's the, proverbial kicking the can down the road. Let's find somebody that's already done it if we can, so.
Put them straight to work.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got 3 things. Does someone want to make a motion?
Supervisor Wilson.
I'll make the motion to move forward with coming back with a final on both the resolution for establishing a committee, a homelessness and housing, affordable housing committee, or whatever it is we're calling it, with the edits or with the ideas that we're putting forward. Yeah, a final version of that, and then also a final version of the shelter crisis declaration with the time frame modified as directed by the board.
Second.
Supervisor Bohn?
As I do that kumbaya where we all got to work together, I will spend the next, is this coming back in 1 week or 2 weeks?
You're here on the 13th, you're not here on the 20th, you're back on the 27th, and some of you we all have meetings, so.
So we're looking at the 27th?
Probably.
Okay. So with that being said, I appreciate that. Again, I'm going to look at everything else because I understand the passion behind the shelter crisis, but I'm not there yet because I'm afraid we're going to get saddled with more. And I know you guys love the idea of it, and I understand why and everything else. But implementation, it looks. But I've got to make sure we can implement it and we can do it soundly. So. Again, that probably just opened my email box to all of you, but anyway, thanks.
Any other comments? Okay, we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries unanimously. Sure. Let's take is it 5 minutes okay? Okay, 5-minute break.